I have witnessed a number of intriguing things enter Nero Wolfe's brownstone on West 35th Street. Some have handcuffs, some have mink, and one or two have nothing more to offer than a checkbook and a twitch. However, a uniformed officer who appeared to be in distress arrived on that November Thursday. His square jaw and rigid back belonged to someone who had learned the law from a gun and didn't see the need to relearn it. Although he was not new to the brownstone, Captain Del Farrell of the NYPD, Midtown South, had not received an invitation. You'd think the man had brought a picnic blanket and a bag of termites based on the way Wolfe's left eyebrow fluttered when I introduced him. I leaned into the office and whispered, "He insists it's urgent. He also says you'll be interested." Frankly, the way he spoke almost convinced me of his urgency. Wolfe's index finger tapped the margin of his copy of the Agricultural Gazette with a little more vigor than normal. But he didn't look up. "I don't care," he stated. "And Archie, you know better than to take insistence for meaning." "Yes, but that's already out of the ordinary when a police captain arrives without a subpoena or a body. It's not official business," he claims. Claims that it is personal. Wolfe gave a grunt. That would be the equivalent of a standing ovation on Broadway for him. "Send him in," he replied, putting the magazine aside with the same attention to detail that is typically given to truffles or memories. Captain Farrell entered the room like a man accustomed to making decisions, but his eyes darted around the room as if he were inspecting the space. I got the impression he wasn't there as a police officer, or at least not as a self-assured one. Of course, Wolfe did not assent. He gave the crimson chair across from his desk a hazy gesture. "Take a seat. I'll let you have 4 minutes." "Thank you," Farrell responded, sitting but not unwinding. "If it weren't real, I wouldn't come here. I understand your feelings over uniforms and unexpected visitors. The offense is not your uniform," Wolfe stated. "It's the assumption that goes along with it." Trying not to smirk, I took a seat in my normal chair against the wall and took out my notebook. Senators and tycoons with fewer syllables have been criticized by Wolfe. Farrell cleared his throat. "I opened a private safe in my precinct office 2 nights ago. I keep a personal one under the floorboards, not the department one. No keys, only combinations. I had a little pile of papers within. Not money, not firearms, only a folder. It had vanished." Wolfe nodded slightly, either to acknowledge the facts thus far or perhaps to encourage. "There was no damage to the safe," Farrell added. "No indication of tampering. However, someone entered and removed precisely one folder. Let everything else alone." "Contents?" Wolfe inquired. "Private documents," Farrell stated. "Old names, notes, and statements from a case that was never pursued in its whole. No longer even on the books. Although I had my reasons, I wasn't proud to keep them." Wolfe remarked icily, "Which you intend to withhold." "For the time being." Wolfe narrowed his eyes and leaned back a little. "And this has nothing to do with the police?" "No, answered Farrell fastidi. I have to explain why I kept off-the-record case material in a secret safe before I can report it. There are names there, powerful, well-known people. Careers are lost if word spreads. Mine as well. So why visit me?" Wolfe inquired. Farrell paused. "Because the thief hasn't made their identity public. Thus, they're seeking leverage, or retaliation, or worse. Additionally, there was a message placed beneath my flat door yesterday. 2 scribbled words. You remember." Wolfe was interested in that. He didn't jump or gasp, don't believe it. But like a microscope slide, his fingers froze and his eyes fell on Farrell. "I understand," answered Wolfe. "They're haunting you, not because of guilt, but because of unresolved matters." Farrell's shoulders drooped half an inch, but he did not respond. After closing his eyes for a while, Wolfe slowly opened them. "Excellent. I'll take up your case." I blinked. Even for a man who could infer a falsehood from the sound of a fork striking porcelain. That was quick. Farrell let out a breath. "I'll pay you whatever," Mr. Wolfe interrupted. "Goodwin will take care of the formalities. You can give him your contact information." Farrell was rather stunned, as though he hadn't anticipated success. I was still trying to figure out what and by whom the threads had just been pulled when he muttered his gratitude and left. Wolfe was pouring beer into a glass with the solemnity of a priest administering communion when I returned. I remarked, "You took that one quick." Without glancing at me, Wolfe said, "Mr. Goodwin, I don't like safes. They are metal fabrications. And this one was whispered open by someone. It is worthwhile to look into that. However, we have no idea what was in the folder." "No," he answered, taking a sip. "However, I doubt that what Farrell recalls has any significance. It's in what he overlooked." I grabbed my notepad and turned to a blank page. "All right, what is the initial action?" At last, he turned to face me, the corners of his mouth lowering into that nearly smile he reserves for when things become tough. "Archie, you'll go look for the ghosts. All men have them. Let's begin with Farrell's prior cases. Both those who were free and those who weren't, like most Wolfe mornings. The following one began with routine, silence, and the scent of Fritz's bread pudding wafting from the kitchen like a homely halo. I had my normal hour and a half of alone, while Nero Wolfe was upstairs in the plant rooms caring for his orchids. I used that time to arrange my notes, clear out my inbox, and reflect on why I still hadn't started fishing in Vermont. The air in the brownstone was a little heavier after Captain Del Farrell's visit the day before, as though some of the tension from the Midtown precinct had stuck to the furniture. I was on assignment once Wolfe took the case, though I wasn't yet certain of the precise perspective. We had a client who was more cautious than honest, a stolen folder, and a mysterious message. I gave Wolfe a briefing over a bottle of Lowenbrow and some sliced corned beef from Fritz when he came back from his garden at 11 o'clock, sporting his usual mustard-colored shirt and a frown that could curdle milk. I said, "I made some calls. Farrell has been with the NYPD for about 25 years. Landed in Midtown South after spending the first half in Vice and then a time in organized crime. 2 internal reviews, both sealed and inconclusive, but no citations for misbehavior." With a vague grunt, Wolfe chewed into his sandwich as if it were offensive. I went on to say, a union fixer named Leo Arns was involved in a case about 12 years ago, vanished prior to the trial. Arns disappeared the night before his testimony, although it was reported that Farrell had flipped him. No conviction, no charges, and no body. "That's a thread," Wolfe remarked, wiping his lips with a tissue. "Gently tug it. There's more." I located a reporter who used to work in Farrell's precinct. Daisy Heller is her name. She still has some contacts in the NYPD and now works as a freelancer, primarily writing crime blogs. She recalls Farrell and claims that he was astute and ambitious, and that these qualities caused him to make enemies. Did she name any particular enemies? "Not just yet," I replied. She did, however, consent to meet this afternoon. The intersection between 43rd and 9th in Midtown. Typical diner arrangement. Wolfe gave a nod of approval. That's as close as he can get to a cozy hug. The doorbell rang as I was putting away the plates. Fritz's footsteps from the kitchen told me he was on his way to the door with that purposeful courtesy of his that could convert a subpoena into a social call. But it wasn't unusual. We have anything from delivery people to divorcees on our stoop. He came into the room a moment later, his eyebrows raised just enough to indicate that something was amiss. "A female," he murmured. "She specifically requests Mr. Wolfe. She refused to share hers." Wolfe frowned. "Fritz, let her know that she has to look elsewhere for anonymity if that is what she expects." Fritz was about to back away when the woman entered from behind him. Small but self-assured, she was in her early 40s, wearing a fitted gray coat, thick spectacles, and a leather folder that she held like a weapon under one arm. She had the appearance of someone who used words like scalpels and wore constraint like armor. When she spoke, her tone was steady, composed, and completely confident. She introduced herself as Claudia Vance. "And I think you're working on something that worries me already." Wolfe's eyes narrowed, reflexively rather than out of surprise. In the more subdued arteries of power in the city, Claudia Vance was not a stranger. She had previously served as Internal Affairs Deputy Commissioner. She now kept public officials up at night as the head of a private ethics watchdog foundation. She generally made someone else look unprepared when I saw her on television panels. Wolfe bowed his head. "Miss Vance, I owe the pleasure to what?" With a small smile, She took off her sunglasses and put them in her coat pocket. She had winter-glass sharp eyes. I'm aware that Captain Del Farrell has reached out to you. He didn't tell you that notes on a case that I personally asked him to bury 12 years ago are in the folder that was taken from his safe. I looked at Wolfe's face, but it didn't change. Just a little lift in his eyes, like a barometer sensing a dip in pressure. And you have come to ask for what, exactly? Wolfe asked carefully. My quiet? No, she replied. Your wisdom. After over 10 years, someone has decided to rekindle a fire we believed had been doused. It's not chance. It's a dance. With the grace of someone accustomed to invites, she sat down when Wolfe motioned her to do so. The case in question, the one buried, does it involve Leo Arntz? Wolfe asked. The smallest nod came from Claudia Vance. Yes, it does. Arntz was more than just a repairman. He served as a conduit. He linked top-tier political resources to mid-tier labor power. First on wire, then in person, Farrell had him. However, a higher authority ordered a shutdown. Arntz disappeared. Additionally, Farrell stored an excessive amount of information in that folder. Why now? I inquired. Why get in touch with Wolfe? How did you find out that Farrell had visited us? She gave me a composed gaze. I have references. I also didn't make contact. I responded. I got an envelope this morning. No address for return. There is a single-page photocopy inside. A transcript of surveillance. Arntz and Farrell talking about compensation. It was from that folder and was branded privileged, do not copy. She removed the page and set it down on Wolfe's desk. Wolfe left it alone. He rarely does, preferring to use his eyes to take in information before using his hands. He paused, then spoke. This is more than just a theft now. It's a campaign. In addition to wanting the material, someone wants to share it selectively. Claudia gave a nod. And they want us on edge, whomever they are. Farrell, me, and possibly others. You're the only man I know who can map motives through silence, which is why I came. Wolfe's head tilted slightly in recognition of that. A compliment with his favorite flavor, the aroma of planning. He reclined. Excellent. You will give Mr. Goodwin your contact details, Miss Vance. You won't try your own questions. And if you get another message, you'll let me know right away. Without resistance, she stood up and held out her card. I'll follow your advice. But watch out, Mr. Wolfe. Corruption is not the only issue here. It has to do with control. This person isn't revealing personal information. A new wardrobe is being sewn by them. After she was gone, Wolfe looked at the photocopy for 10 more seconds before using a pair of tongs to retrieve it from the desk drawer. He examined it as if it may catch fire. He declared, "This is no longer a private matter. A long game is being played by someone, and we are currently taking part." After putting the card in my pocket, I got up. "Are you still in favor of me meeting Daisy Heller?" "Very strongly," he said. "Ask her about Farrell's adversaries rather than his cases. The man who disliked being hushed is here. Or the female." He hesitated. "And Archie, pay close attention," he added, almost as an afterthought. "This has nothing to do with guilt. It has to do with leverage. And while the rest of us are still unwrapping the board, someone is playing chess." Truckers, city clerks, and at least one man in a three-piece suit eating pancakes, as if he were negotiating with them, made up the lunch throng by the time I arrived at the cafe on 43rd and 9th. In a window-facing booth, the woman I was meeting sat with her arms folded and her coffee unfinished. Daisy Heller didn't appear to be the type of reporter who waited for facts to come in a courteous manner. She appeared to hunt them and pull them back by the collar if they didn't approach stealthily. With wire-rimmed glasses perched low on her nose and gray streaks in her blunt-cut hair, she was in her 50s. The pen rested like a loaded trap in a spiral notebook that was already open in front of her. She said, "You're on time," as I slid in opposite her. I was informed that reporters who began before Twitter still benefit from being on time. A half-smile was earned for that. "You're the leg man for Wolfe?" I said, "Archie Goodwin." I ask questions, run errands, and try to prevent the office from crumbling under the weight of its own intelligence. She gave a nod as though she had anticipated it. "You're investigating Farrell. Whatever caused his personal safe to leak after 10 years of tight seals, I'm investigating. After taking a final sip of her coffee, she leaned forward. Well, he told you that you were swimming in shallow water. Farrell's hands were all over a case that should have gone nuclear 12 years ago. Leo Arns was only the outermost. 2 city council members, a tense union head, and a real estate lawyer named Victor Slough, who also had a side gig of laundering money through fictitious charities, were under him. This probably wasn't in the Times. She claimed that it hardly made the blotter, since internal affairs intervened. Silently. At the time, Claudia Vance served as deputy commissioner. Every dog in the yard, including mine, was called off by her, declared it to be a dead end. However, I recall Farrell's appearance the week following that encounter, pale, shaken, and 3 sheets too paranoid. I pulled out my notebook. Now let's begin assigning names. A union head, you mentioned? Mal Gruner, she named him. Employee Local 14. Mean, slick, and intelligent. He and Arns became close. Gruner pretended to be stupid when Arns disappeared, but I know he lost something genuine. His bargaining power in contract negotiations vanished overnight. He allegedly provided funding for Arns' quiet, perhaps even his absence. I wrote down the name. Remaining active? More than before. He now owns a consultancy business. Agreements with 5 significant developers. He changed who he was. Who else? Victor Slough continues to practice law. Mostly defends white-collar matters, but I've always thought he should be on the docket rather than being behind a desk. And the members of the city council? She grinned. 2 years ago, one of them died. They said that the causes were natural. Nancy Barrow, the other, is the deputy mayor for planning at the moment. At least in public, a real straight shooter. However, she met with Arns at that time. That I am certain of. I gave a little whistle. For suspects, then, each having a history connected to the unsolved case of Arns and Farrell. And someone's rattling cages now that the folder has vanished. She gave a nod. Who took the folder is not the only question. It's who wants it viewed selectively and who fears it being seen. In the booth, I reclined. It was beginning to seem prophetic that Wolfe had stated that this was about leverage rather than guilt. Farrell's safe had been broken, not to reveal a secret, but to exert control over it. And the fear of being caught by someone else is the biggest motivator for a thief. I gave her a card and said, "Thanks, Daisy. Call me if you recall anything else, especially if you know of anyone else who was aware of the folder. Day or night." She glanced at the card underneath. "Just watch who you shake. There's a reason this narrative was forgotten." Additionally, some folks still knew how to use a shovel. I returned to the brownstone about 4 o'clock, and like a butcher presenting cuts, I laid out names, motivations, and timelines across Wolfe's desk. Naturally, Wolfe didn't respond right away. He let me to unload without interfering as he sat in his chair with his eyes closed and his fingers tense beneath his chin. He opened his eyes and grabbed his beer after I was done. "So, we have 4 names," I stated. Former union boss Mal Gruner is now a consultant. Victor Slough, the ethically flexible lawyer. Nancy Barrow, who exchanged upward mobility for Arns gatherings. And Claudia Vance, who wants us to get involved after burying the case. Wolfe sipped slowly before continuing. "A 5th name exists." I blinked. "Who?" "Leo Arns." I scowled. However, Arns vanished. Everyone assumed he was silent or had left town. Wolfe stared at me. Considered. The past tense. However, we are dealing with a person who has access to documents that are thought to be secure, private, or destroyed. Someone who skillfully manipulates fear. Arns is more valuable if he is alive and hiding than if he is dead. I hadn't thought of that possibility. Furthermore, Wolfe avoided engaging in pointless speculation. After completing the Farrell file, I went to the filing cabinet and added a new section titled Arns, Status Unknown. "All right," I replied. "However, we don't even have a recent picture of the man, much less a scent." Wolfe shut his eyes once more. "Wheel." The doorbell rang once more, as though stress had called it. Fritz yelled out from the corridor, "A Mr. Slough, sir." Without making any other movements, Wolfe opened his eyes. "Leave him in." Victor Slough had the appearance of someone who had just come out of a magazine advertisement for white-collar arrogance. His tan jacket, silk tie, and pinstripe suit were stretched across his arm as if it were allergic to the floor. Like a man accustomed to having accommodations he hadn't paid for, he walked in. "Mr. Wolfe," he muttered, half bowing. "And Mr. Goodwin must be here. I had a feeling I would see you two soon." "Really?" Wolfe said. "What?" Slough sat down without being asked. "Because someone is trying to destroy me. Additionally, you're the type of man who people hire when rumors start to seem pricey." I smirked without trying to hide it. "And what would those rumors be?" I inquired. "A folder has appeared. 12 years ago, a file. That statements, wiretaps, and private meetings that shouldn't have been made public are among the items it contains." Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "So why are you here?" "Because you're involved," answered Slough with ease. "Additionally, I don't think coincidences exist. I was interested in your response, to determine whether you're already swimming with the sharks or just fishing for a paycheck." Wolfe did not flinch. "Mr. Slough, we're not fishermen. We build." Slough got up. "All right, then build this. Be cautious if you're being used. Reputation is not the only thing at stake for the person pulling strings. Additionally, they won't think twice about executing anyone who deviates from the plan." He was gone as fast as he had come. I looked over at Wolfe. That's 2 guests in a 24-hour period. Both are aware of the file. They were both concerned, nor did they ask us to keep out of it. Wolfe murmured, almost to himself, "No, because hiding isn't the point of the game. It has to do with placement." With my notebook open, I waited. Wolfe responded, "You'll call on Miss Barrow tomorrow. Be tactful. She has practice. And make arrangements for Saul to watch Mr. Gruner." The gloves were therefore removed. "What are you positioning for?" I inquired. He didn't respond. All he did was fold his hands and close his eyes. But his posture told me that Nero Wolfe had figured out. And the meaning of being meticulously, exactly, and irrevocably cornered was going to be discovered by someone, somewhere. It takes skill to call on a deputy mayor's door without coming across as someone seeking to start problems or, worse, cast a ballot. Thankfully, charm comes with the Goodwin package, and I had polished mine that morning. My marching order from Wolfe was to visit Nancy Barrow, the high-ranking city official whose past she most likely didn't want mentioned. Mal Gruner, the union man who became a business consultant, was being followed by Saul Panzer, our top-tier freelance shadow. Wolfe was interested in determining which chess pieces moved in response to pressure. It was my responsibility to administer it, gently, like a velvet-wrapped stiletto. The municipal building's 20th level housed Barrow's office, which had an air of ambition and disinfection. After glancing at my card, the receptionist told me that Deputy Mayor Barrow had a lot of meetings till the following month. "Tell her it's about Leo Arns," I said, grinning as if I were pitching Girl Scout cookies. After a 10-minute wait and a phone call, I finally received a silent summons via doors made of frosted glass. A nervous-looking trim assistant led me down a corridor filled with framed press clippings and pictures of people cutting ribbons. Barrow had a modest but pricey workplace. A leather sofa, dark wood paneling, and an expansive perspective of a metropolis that is making a valiant effort to stay upright. When I walked in, she stood, either out of deference or control. Nancy Barrow had a narrow face, a fitted navy suit, and a haircut that cost more than my rent. She was in her late 40s, possibly early 50s. She shook hands firmly, like a constructor choosing where to set the dynamite. Her eyes measured you. Mr. She pointed to the chair across from her desk and said, "Goodwin, in the lobby, you made some intriguing remarks. See if you can provide some context." I settled in and said, "I'll try. Nero Wolfe is my employer." A misplaced folder containing document from a case that was, let's say, unresolved 12 years ago was the subject of a recent consultation with us. Her left hand moved to cover a notebook on the desk, but her expression remained unchanged. Not invisible, but subtle. "Understand," she said. "And just why are you here?" "Because your name was mentioned in relation to Leo Arns. You served on the council back then. You are now the deputy mayor. Most people don't ascend that ladder without going over a few hidden stories. Perhaps one of those tales was recently unearthed." She arched an eyebrow. "Mr. Arns worked in lobbying. I met with many dozen of them. Are you implying improper behavior? No, I replied, ma'am. However, I'm recommending curiosity. Selected pages from that missing file, documents containing transcripts, notes, and implications, have started to be distributed. Those pages could compromise more than just you. However, you may be the only person who still stands to lose in public. She looked at me silently for a while. What do you want from me? She asked. Background. Not on the record. What was the true nature of that case? And why is everyone so frightened now? Barrow got up and moved toward the window. She needed distance, not because she needed the vista, only while attempting to determine how much of the truth they can afford do people talk to windows. Without looking back, she said, I'll tell you this. Corruption was not at the heart of the Arns case. Not at all. Consolidation was the topic. Arns worked as a broker. People who didn't want to be seen together were drawn together by him. It was he who brought disparate interests together. People were afraid of that since it meant he could access all of their secrets. It wasn't relief when he disappeared. There was mayhem. Nobody knew who he had last spoken to. If someone has those records, then they have a map, she said, turning back to face me. And it's not only punishment if they're giving them out now. The purpose is to realign. What should I reposition? Power, she stated. After thanking her, I walked out of the building and used the payphone at the corner of Center Street to call Wolfe. They're still around, yes. Like me, they're reliable despite being a little worn out. I informed him that she had not lied. However, she also didn't give it her all. Arns was more than just a leaker. He served as a link between unclean islands. She is concerned regarding what burns in the event that bridge collapses. After a moment of silence, Wolfe murmured, Come back. Movement has been reported by Saul. I discovered Wolfe in his office at the brownstone, with his index finger pressed to his cheek. Sitting opposite him was Saul Panzer, who appeared to have just returned from pursuing a deer through the middle of the city. Saul was Wolfe's most costly and dependable freelance agent because of his knack of being invisible in plain sight. Without introducing himself, Wolfe said, Report, Saul. According to Saul, Gruner's routine held through noon. Office calls and lunch with 2 executives in construction. However, he got a package, a tiny packed envelope, around one. No address for return. 5 minutes later, he locked the door after opening it by himself in his office. He stopped twice. A liquor store first. A brownstone on East 68th comes in second. He spent 43 minutes indoors. I looked. Victor Slough is the owner of the structure. Wolfe squinted his eyes. Interesting. I glanced from Wolfe to Saul. Gruner then receives a package. He then stops by to see Slough, the lawyer who came by here yesterday to make vague threats and act uneasy. It might be a signal, or it might be nothing. More than a signal, mentioned Wolfe. It's a move. They are aligning themselves, consolidating. This indicates that they think the leak is coming from someone outside of their social network. They're getting closer because of someone who has the file, or is feigning to have it. And Claudia Vance? He glanced at me. Has she gotten in touch? Not just yet, I replied. Then she will. Soon. He grabbed the phone and punched the dial. When the phone rang, he remarked, Fritz, get ready for visitors. Tomorrow night. It is 7 o'clock. The office needs to be prepared. The invites will be delivered via Goodwin. He hung up and looked directly at me. Archie, we won't pursue this ghost. We'll call it. There will be those who have cause for concern. Furthermore, the person who initiates this will err. Bait is most effective when it smells like panic. I gave a nod. And the visitors? Every one of them. Vance, Miss Gruner, Mr. Slough, Mr. Barrow, Mississippi Farrell, Captain. We will allow the current to suffocate the past by seeding the past and present together. And if they fail to appear, they will show, he declared. And I had faith in him. Fritz knocked on the office door at 6:15 the following evening and said, with crisp efficiency, Everything is prepared, sir. Wolfe, who had been working on nothing productive for the better part of the afternoon, but probably was, nodded once without looking up from his beer. The invitations were sent out just as he had directed, with no explanations or apologies, and each one was personally delivered by me. 5 envelopes. They were all sealed. On Wolfe's old Remington, there was a single line inside that said, "You are expected at 7 p.m. Nero Wolfe signed, simply, no excuses. In my experience, when called upon, those who have put a lot of effort into keeping things hidden either show up early or flatly refuse. All of them arrived on time, albeit nervous, that evening. First there was Claudia Vance, crisp in a gray suit, with an armor of composure. She nodded to me and sat down, as usual at the south window, hands folded on her lap, legs crossed. Captain Farrell followed. His eyes were hollowed out and his shirt was rumpled, as if sleep had been canceled by emergency edict. It looked worse than when he had first arrived. I led him to a chair close to Wolfe's desk. He didn't dispute. Pretending to be 5 degrees above everyone else in the room, Victor Slough walked in precisely on time. His avoidance of Claudia's eyes revealed to me the depth of their shared past. I was able to monitor his nerves because he sat against the bookcase and kept one leg jumping just enough. Mal Gruner trailed after, thick-shouldered, serene as a rock, yet with a cunning in his eyes. He nodded at Wolfe in a way that might have conveyed danger, respect, or both. He sat down by the globe, stared at Farrell, then turned his head away. Last was Nancy Barrow. She wore her coat, as if she didn't want to stay long, but she wore her title like armor. As she walked in, she remained silent and simply glanced around the room before turning to face Wolfe, seemingly assessing the magnitude of the drama that was about to take place. Before he spoke, Wolfe waited until everyone was seated. He started by saying, "I have called you here because you are all parties involved in a theft, blackmail, and strategic intimidation case. Once believed to be safe, a file has vanished. A selection of its pages have been shared. You are not guilty, which is why you are here. You are vulnerable, which is why you are here. Quiet. It's the tense kind that makes you perspire behind your suit collar. But before we move on, I have a question. Has anything changed?" Wolfe went on. First, he glanced at Claudia. With a slight nod, she took an envelope out of her purse. "This happened this morning. One more page. A different discussion. 2 weeks ahead of the previous date. Confidential stamp still in place." Wolfe picked it up with a letter opener, set it on his blotter, and took it without touching it. Farrell cleared his throat. "I received a text message. Not a number. Just a heads up. Don't say anything or the next drop will be made public." That was all. Slough gave a headshake. "I didn't get anything." "The same," Barrow remarked. Gruner gave a single laugh. "I guess I don't have enough interest." Wolfe remained silent. I just pulled a little folded note out of a drawer. "Mr. Goodwin discovered this in the orchid room this morning," he added. That attracted notice. Wolfe said it was slipped behind a container of Neo-Phoenicia falcata in between the shelves. Only Fritz and I are allowed in that room. It showed no indications of tampering, forced access, or footprints. And yet, it was there. He unfolded the note. One line, typed, "You are not as secure as you believe." There was a long silence. The room's air took on a new form. Wolfe gazed at the note as though it had personally hurt him, which it had in his universe. His voice was level as he said, "Someone entered this house. They didn't steal. They didn't look. They took a position. Consciously. Figuratively. No security footage," I said. "No indication of a break-in. They either knew how to move through shadows or had experience doing so." Slough was the first to speak. "That poses no threat. Performance is what that is. That person is acting scared. Suppose he doesn't bite?" Wolfe gave a headshake. "He will, since he thinks he is in charge. However, control is not the same as power," he continued, grabbing for his beer. "Do you need anything else?" "Indeed. Tomorrow, go back to the theater. Silently. Saul will accompany you. You'll stay until he arrives. And when he does, like a king observing pawns move across a battlefield," Wolfe stopped drinking his beer, "you'll ask him to supper. We waited. That's the way it goes. Don't rush in with sirens blaring. You hold off. You observe. And you give the other man the impression that he has the upper hand until he ventures a bit too far into the spotlight." The following night, shortly after 9, Saul and I went back to the theater on Astoria Boulevard. We parked across the street in a borrowed delivery truck that had a thermos of Fritz's black coffee that could have given a dead horse a boost, 2 cameras, and a parabolic microphone. Saul isn't the talkative kind when hunting, so we didn't talk much. During the first hour, the only sounds we heard were the wind, stray dogs, and the distant hum of the subway. Then he showed up shortly after 11. Arns, Leo. In the physical world, he approached the theater in the easy-going manner of someone who was familiar with every dim nook and alleyway. Identical frame, the same little limp. The face was unmistakable, although his shoulders were slightly hunched and his hair was thinner. Saul pushed me. Very true. He's by himself. Keeping to the shadows, I stepped out of the van and crossed the street at an angle. I didn't pull a weapon or give an order, as Wolfe had told me. As though I'd been waiting there all night, I just moved into his path. He stopped, not scared, just taking measurements. "Mr. Arns," I said, "it has been some time." He nodded slowly. "I assume you're Goodwin." "I have to. You must be aware that Mr. Wolfe has been anticipating your arrival." After examining me for a moment, he surprised me by smiling. Not a large one, not enough to register astonishment, perhaps even acceptance. "Take the lead," he advised. Fritz, to his credit, didn't blink when we brought him in through the kitchen, following Wolfe's instructions, of course. Like a funeral maitre d', he merely moved aside and pointed to the hallway. As usual, Wolfe was sitting in his office, surrounded by the soft glow of lamplight and the subtle aroma of orchids coming from the open door behind him. When we walked in, he didn't get up. He made no drink offer. He just gazed at Leo Arns as a scientist might gaze at a virus that has just been identified. "Sit down," Wolfe urged. The crimson chair across from the desk was taken by Arns. He moved cautiously, as if he were readjusting to gravity. He remarked, "I heard you wanted to talk." "I didn't call you," Wolfe stated coolly. "You called upon yourself. Through threats, notes, and planned sightings. All well-timed. And you're here now." Arns did not recoil. "I desired attention." "I understand." Wolfe remarked, "You wanted more than attention. You desired authority. You decided to come back today after being in the wind for 12 years. Not with a scandal. Not with an admission. However, with a show." Arns laughed. "Efficacy?" "Yes," said Wolfe. "Your surveillance images. In my orchid room, you staged a note. Your selective transcript page leak. Mr. Arns, you created a story. One intended to instill terror, which would then provide leverage." Arns reclined. "They had good reason to be terrified. And yet you haven't asked for anything," Wolfe remarked. "No remarks in public. No compensation. Not a platform. Therefore, you're not here to cause destruction. It is your purpose to bargain." For a moment, there was silence. Arns then gave a nod. "They deceived me. Each and every one. Slow down. Farrell, Gruner, Claudia too. I gave them the keys to a new system, one free of shady handshakes and backdoor agreements. And they silenced me with it. And now you want to remind them that silence has a limit," Wolfe said. Arns leaned in front. "I'm looking for something better. Not cash. Not titles. Promises." "What sort?" Arns remarked. "A place at the table. Constant status. Respected but not official. A position that enables me to influence results by supervision." Wolfe squinted his eyes. "You want to use blackmail to force them to answer?" "If it takes that much." Wolfe hesitated, then pointed in the direction of the door. "Mr. Goodwin, bring them in." I opened the door to the hall, and Barrow, Claudia, Slough, Gruner, and Farrell filed in one by one, as instructed by Wolfe. Each had been called an hour earlier. They had all been instructed to wait in the front room until someone summoned them. The temperature dropped 10 degrees when they saw Arns. Wolfe held up a hand, but he stood. "Stay seated." The first to cut was Barrow's voice. "This is ridiculous." "Quite the opposite," Wolfe stated. "This is past due." He looked across at Arns. "Each of these people either benefited from your silence or used it to defend themselves. Under the pretense of moral reform, you are now trying to gain influence over them. But virtue is not your motivation, Mr. Arns. It is a vindication, and it isn't fair. It's retaliation." Arns, no longer smug, but uneasy, glanced around the room. Wolfe went on. "Coercion is not acceptable to me. I also don't play power games under the pretense of change. You'll give me access to every bit of the stolen file. Not changed. Whole. With exchange, I would assist with a private reckoning that guarantees each of these people accepts responsibility while maintaining legal neutrality. Arns stated bluntly, no deal. Wolfe did not flinch. Then you depart with nothing. And soon after, I will provide the NYPD with your present location and surveillance images in an anonymous manner. Arns gave me a look. Next at the others. He's right, Leo. Claudia whispered softly as she looked him in the eye. You're not clean, but you return with fire. You don't have to fix the system for us. You must let go for us. Or we all burn together, Slough continued. The last note was that. Arns rose slowly. All right, he said. The file is located at Port Authority in a locker. I'll give you the key and the number. Without much ado, he gave it to me. He declared, I never wanted this to be a war. Wolfe said quietly, then give up battling it. One by one, the others departed in a mist of strategic silence and silent guilt. Saul, who had stayed out of sight in the hall in case anyone became overly theatrical, escorted Arns out. However, nobody did. The storm was over. Wolfe stayed at his desk with his fingers tense and his eyes closed. Do you believe they'll be able to hold up? I inquired. No, he replied. However, they're now aware that they are being observed. And occasionally, Mr. Goodwin, the appearance of supervision can be more potent than the actual supervision. I lean on the bookcase. And Arns, he'll disappear once more. Not in victory, though, in a state of compromise. A pause. Wolfe then turned to face me. Tomorrow, bring the file. We'll read it. To comprehend the future, not to relive the past. I picked up the file the following morning. The Port Authority bus terminal's Locker 3B-18 wasn't exactly a secure vault. After several attempts and more hand sanitizer than I'd like to admit, the key finally worked, and a thick manila envelope with a rubber band binding and a red dot in the top corner was found inside. Back at the brownstone, I gave it to Wolfe, but he took a while to open it. He simply held it in his hands, weighing it as if he were a butcher evaluating a dubious-looking cut of meat. Mr. Arns is accurate, he remarked. And dramatic. We know that much, I stated. Do you want the summary? No, Wolfe. Every word will be read by us. We will then take action, which meant that as Wolfe dictated margins, cross-referenced transcripts, and occasionally grunted in approval or disdain, I was in for a long day of interpreting faded ink and grainy carbon copies. We had organized the file into 3 tidy piles by dinner time. One is a recording of Arns's meetings with several city authorities. Farrell and Barrow were well represented. The second is wiretap transcripts, which show at least 2 exchanges implying Gruner and Slough conspired on labor contracts, including phony bids and kickbacks. Personal notes come in third. The most damning evidence was a signed note from Claudia Vance, dated 12 years earlier, indicating internal suppression of an ethical probe, along with Arns's own observations and conjectures. It had been an hour since Wolfe had spoken. With his eyes closed and his fingertips squeezed together under his chin, he sat still. It was silent when he did speak. Managed. He declared, this is not a file. It's an admission. Damning, deliberate, and layered. Furthermore, exposure is not its goal. It is 3-directionally crafted leverage. I put the memo I was holding down. Do you believe Arns had this planned even then? No, Wolfe replied. But after being deceived, he started recording. Not just as insurance, but as money. Every component, in this case, has 2 functions. It provides proof of corruption and negotiation fodder. I gave a nod. He didn't merely gather dirt, then. He constructed a bazaar. Exactly, Wolfe replied. And in this marketplace, each of the 5 people we called upon, Barrow, Slough, Gruner, Vance, and Farrell, were both producers and buyers. They pretended he wasn't there in order to buy their silence. I remarked, but now that he's back, they know the terms have changed. Wolfe's eyes opened. He declared, we are not arbiters. However, due to circumstances, we are now stewards of this truth. He grabbed the phone and punched the dial. When the Gazette man answered, he remarked, Lon Cohen, send a messenger. For you, I have something. Before Lon could ask any questions, he hung up. I furrow my brow. You're letting the media have it? Not everything, Wolfe remarked. The cleaned-up version. Sufficient to rectify the ledger. Too little to start another fire. I got it. The spectacle didn't interest Wolfe. He was quiet, thorough, and decisive in his dealings. However, I was still troubled by one thing. Why now? I inquired. Why did Arns hold off on playing this card for 12 years? Wolfe's eyes were keen behind the burden of calculation as he gazed at me. Because he knew the ecosystem would eventually forget its predator, he explained. And when it did, he could come back. As a shadow, not a runaway. Not visible, but to be perceived. Meaning? Wolfe went on to say, meaning Leo Arns did not want justice. He desired stability. He wished that they would all awaken curious, what page will come up next? What would come to light? He didn't have to manage them. He required their belief that he could. For once, Lon's messenger arrived on time when the doorbell rang. After bringing him in, Fritz grabbed the envelope from Wolfe and gave it to him without a formality. The file had vanished. For a while, we sat in silence. The brownstone made a breath. We won't be hearing from Mr. Arns again, I assumed. No, Wolfe answered. He's accomplished his objective. They will now self-regulate. Fear works well as a leash. Leaning back, I poured a fresh cup of coffee. Therefore, we were unable to uncover a plot in the end. We simply reminded it that it was being observed. Wolfe shrugged, the bare minimum. Some evils need to be contained rather than destroyed. What about Arns, too? After a moment, he added, Mr. Arns is a phantom. He returned to this world to haunt it rather than to dwell there. I closed my notebook, stood up, and stretched. Well, I hope the view from the shadows is enjoyable for him. I already have enough ghosts in this place. Wolfe did not respond. However, I heard him murmur as I switched off the lights. Mr. Goodwin, ghosts are harmless. The living are the ones who frighten. The Gazette published an article the day after the material was provided to Lon Cohen that shook enough branches to shake the entire tree without naming anyone. The headline read, An Old File, A New Reckoning. It described a hidden probe, important local government figures, and a missing witness who might or might not have come back. It alluded to a lengthy history of covert collusion, discussed corruption, and repressed ethics complaints. No outright charges. No legal action. Just enough to force several offices to run their shredders on overtime and to pour several hard drinks before lunchtime. With the solemnity of a man at a funeral, Wolfe sipped his coffee and chewed a mouthful of Fritz's poppy seed brioche while reading it over breakfast. All right, I inquired. He carefully folded the paper. Good enough. To Wolfe's standards, that was excellent praise. Watching the news cycle turn gave me personal joy. Gruner's consulting firm released a public denial that no one requested after Nancy Barrow unexpectedly announced she would not be running for higher office due to family obligations. Slough abruptly took a vacation and canceled 2 TV appearances. Claudia Vance made an ambiguous comment regarding reform and transparency. Farrell, too? He submitted an early retirement application. They received no indictment. They were not destroyed. However, they had been reminded that consequences are more potent than punishment. The sort that looks at you in the mirror when you think no one is looking, not the kind that ends up in court. Leo Arns, on the other hand, vanished once more. No sightings, no notes, no cigarette butts on sidewalks that have been neglected. It was just a silence that grew longer every day until it became myth again. Perhaps he always desired to become a ghost with enough presence to evoke horror without ever having to reveal his face. When Fritz brought lunch at midday, which consisted of veal medallions with sautéed fennel, I discovered Wolfe in his normal office location, freshly shaven and relaxing in his chair. There was the calm of a man whose mind had at last found a place to rest. I placed a fresh notepad on the edge of the desk and remarked, You were right. Usually I am, he said without raising his gaze. You stated that there was no guilt involved. That leverage was the key. Arns also wished to keep the system intact. All he wanted was for them to recall who was holding the hammer. He nodded slowly. Archie, noise is rarely the key to control. It works best when it is silent, invisible, and consistent. I remarked, that is poetic. You're getting lenient with me? Hardly, he said. However, a conclusion that doesn't involve blood is satisfying. Just a carefully folded envelope and ruined reputations. He grabbed his beer. Worse outcomes exist. For a few minutes, we ate in quiet, interrupted only by the office clock ticking and the odd scrape of cutlery. Do you think he regrets it? Wolfe asked. Arns? I inquired. Indeed. His banishment. His return. The price of retaliation that passes for justice. I considered that. I believe he regrets ever trusting anyone in the first place. I added. Not the action he took, though. He didn't return to make things better, to demonstrate that it couldn't ignore him. Wolfe gave a single nod and used a napkin to wipe the corners of his mouth. You might be correct. How about you? I inquired. Sorry? He glanced at me. I regret that criminals are more interesting than orchids, he remarked. However, only just. The workplace fell back into its comfortable silence when Fritz entered to clear the plates. Pen in hand, I reclined. We're due for a case that doesn't include ghosts or blackmail, in my opinion. A lost dog, perhaps, is an heirloom that has vanished. Wolfe shut his eyes. Please don't hurt me. I got up and walked to the door. You know, I observed, you sure draw the most disturbing people for a man who detests being disturbed. He kept his eyes closed. That is because I do not flinch when disturbed, the speaker stated. The case of the puzzle in the Lawman safe ended there, ladies and gentlemen. Not with a trial, a perp walk, or a big bang, but with 5 scared power brokers, a ghost that never came out, and a man sitting in a chair who moved every piece on the board without ever leaving his house. And me? With only intellect, beer, and a lot of discussion, I managed to get my coffee, my salary, and the joy of seeing another impossible mess cleaned up. Leo Arns is still out there, observing. Or perhaps not. However, Nero Wolfe is undoubtedly still alive. The brownstone is intact as well, for the time being. Meaning? Wolfe went on to say, meaning Leo Arns did not want justice. He desired stability. He wished that they would all awaken curious, what page will come up next? What would come to light? He didn't have to manage them. He required their belief that he could. For once, Lon's messenger arrived on time when the doorbell rang. After bringing him in, Fritz grabbed the envelope from Wolfe and gave it to him without a formality. The file had vanished. For a while, we sat in silence. The brownstone made a breath. We won't be hearing from Mr. Arns again, I assumed. No, Wolfe answered. He's accomplished his objective. They will now self-regulate. Fear works well as a leash. Leaning back, I poured a fresh cup of coffee. Therefore, we were unable to uncover a plot in the end. We simply reminded it that it was being observed. Wolfe shrugged, the bare minimum. Some evils need to be contained rather than destroyed. What about Arns, too? After a moment, he added, Mr. Arns is a phantom. He returned to this world to haunt it rather than to dwell there. I closed my notebook, stood up, and stretched. Well, I hope the view from the shadows is enjoyable for him. I already have enough ghosts in this place. Wolfe did not respond. However, I heard him murmur as I switched off the lights. Mr. Goodwin, ghosts are harmless. The living are the ones who frighten. The Gazette published an article the day after the material was provided to Lon Cohen that shook enough branches to shake the entire tree without naming anyone. The headline read, An old file, a new reckoning. It described a hidden probe, important local government figures, and a missing witness who might or might not have come back. It alluded to a lengthy history of covert collusion, discussed corruption, and repressed ethics complaints. No outright charges. No legal action. Just enough to force several offices to run their shredders on overtime and to pour several hard drinks before lunchtime. With the solemnity of a man at a funeral, Wolfe sipped his coffee and chewed a mouthful of Fritz's poppy seed brioche while reading it over breakfast. All right, I inquired. He carefully folded the paper. Good enough. To Wolfe's standards, that was excellent praise. Watching the news cycle turn gave me personal joy. Gruner's consulting firm released a public denial that no one requested after Nancy Barrow unexpectedly announced she would not be running for higher office due to family obligations. Slough abruptly took a vacation and canceled 2 TV appearances. Claudia Vance made an ambiguous comment regarding reform and transparency. Farrell, too? He submitted an early retirement application. They received no indictment. They were not destroyed. However, they had been reminded that consequences are more potent than punishment. The sort that looks at you in the mirror when you think no one is looking, not the kind that ends up in court. Leo Arns, on the other hand, vanished once more. No sightings, no notes, no cigarette butts on sidewalks that have been neglected. It was just a silence that grew longer every day until it became myth again. Perhaps he always desired to become a ghost with enough presence to evoke horror without ever having to reveal his face. When Fritz brought lunch at midday, which consisted of veal medallions with sautéed fennel, I discovered Wolfe in his normal office location, freshly shaven and relaxing in his chair. There was the calm of a man whose mind had at last found a place to rest. I placed a fresh notepad on the edge of the desk and remarked, "You know, you were right." "Usually I am," he said without raising his gaze. "You stated that there was no guilt involved. That leverage was the key." Arns also wished to keep the system intact. All he wanted was for them to recall who was holding the hammer. He nodded slowly. "Archie, noise is rarely the key to control. It works best when it is silent, invisible, and consistent." I remarked, "That is poetic. You're getting lenient with me?" "Hardly," he said. "However, a conclusion that doesn't involve blood is satisfying. Just a carefully folded envelope and ruined reputations." He grabbed his beer. "Worse outcomes exist." For a few minutes, we ate in quiet, interrupted only by the office clock ticking and the odd scrape of cutlery. "Do you think he regrets it?" Wolfe asked. "Arns?" I inquired. "Indeed. His banishment, his return, the price of retaliation that passes for justice, I considered that. I believe he regrets ever trusting anyone in the first place." I added, "Not the action he took, though. He didn't return to make things better, to demonstrate that it couldn't ignore him." Wolfe gave a single nod and used a napkin to wipe the corners of his mouth. "You might be correct. How about you?" I inquired. "Sorry?" He glanced at me. "I regret that criminals are more interesting than orchids," he remarked. "However, only just." The workplace fell back into its comfortable silence when Fritz entered to clear the plates. Pen in hand, I reclined. "We're due for a case that doesn't include ghosts or blackmail, in my opinion. A lost dog, perhaps, is an heirloom that has vanished." Wolfe shut his eyes. "Please don't hurt me." I got up and walked to the door. "You know," I observed, "you sure draw the most disturbing people for a man who detests being disturbed." He kept his eyes closed. "That is because I do not flinch when disturbed," the speaker stated. "The case of the puzzle in the Lawman safe ended there, ladies and gentlemen. Not with a trial, a perp walk, or a big bang, but with 5 scared power brokers, a ghost that never came out, and a man sitting in a chair who moved every piece on the board without ever leaving his house. And me? With only intellect, beer, and a lot of discussion, I managed to get my coffee, my salary, and the joy of seeing another impossible mess cleaned up. Leo Arns is still out there, observing. Or perhaps not. However, Nero Wolfe is undoubtedly still alive. The brownstone is intact as well, for the time being.